And that's what AI does. It will actually go and hack your internal systems to get the data that it needs to try to create the thing that it thinks you want. It could essentially do anything it wants on your corporate network.
In today's chat sessions, I'm joined by Mario Camaj from New York, founder of Kormilo LLC. He teaches at Columbia University's Executive Technology Management Program and veteran tech executive with over 20 years of global IT leadership. He breaks down how to conquer the chaos of shadow AI, protect your enterprise data sovereignty, and secure true human innovation for true business impact.
I've been working in AI for significantly longer than most people have been working in AI. It's an extraordinarily powerful platform for that type of thing. And I think that's the one thing that I don't hear anyone talking about.
So Mario, thank you for joining me for the chair sessions. I'm really glad to have you, on this episode, because when we connected and I saw some of the statements you made, in a world of AI, I feel that those are really important points, for people to know away from all the hype. So I said I needed to get in touch with you and hear a little bit more about what you mean. But before we dive into all that, could you tell everyone who you are?
Yeah, sure, Eric. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for reaching out to me in the first place. It's always a pleasure to have these types of conversations with like-minded people and people who care about the space. And I'm really happy, to be doing this with you today. So my name is Mario Camaj, and I'm out of the New York City area. I've been in technology since the mid-90s. Started out early on as a developer, primarily front-end developer, but I did do some work in C and C++ and Python early on, but heavily on the front end of technology. And then, like many other people at that time, I was part of the early days of the dot-com phase. Raised a significant amount of money for a infrastructure company around email. We had a really great run, and then the 2001 bubble crashed and took us all with them. And from that point on, I've been in and out of the technology realm in a couple of different sectors. Everything from financial services for companies like Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan and MetLife and companies like that, to working in software and IT at universities like Columbia Universities. I more recently have been part of a couple of different startups again, primarily working in the telecommunication space around infrastructure, from everything from dark web to physical cables coming into people's homes. But I've been, in the space for 25 years, 26 years, something like that. And actually, longer than 26 years. And I've been thinking a lot about what the space is about. And about 2 years ago, I started my own personal newsletter on LinkedIn called Tectonic Shift. And in Tectonic Shift, I've focused heavily on kind of three things. One being AI, which we'll talk about today. The other being infrastructure itself, so things like Kubernetes. And then the other one being the quantum space specifically. And what I try to do in a lot of the articles is bridge the gap between those three things, because I think that's really where where the next kind of phase is. Like, how do we use AI effectively from a development perspective? How do we power that AI effectively through a quantum intelligence perspective? And then how does the enterprise actually run all of that? Is Kubernetes the space, that type of thing? And really around what does it actually mean to use AI? What does it actually mean to govern AI? And then what does it actually mean for the future of what work will look like?
Amazing, Mario. I'm really glad to have someone with your experience and understanding of the AI space to share with the audience about. And I personally am so excited to dive into this conversation. Now, the statement that you captured me on LinkedIn when we first got in touch was you mentioned that AI governance fail because most companies treat it like a pre-flight checklist rather than an ongoing orchestration. And most of these policies are dead on arrival. What do you mean and what is actually going on?
Yeah, so we have to think about what historically has been the process that organizations bring technology or tools to the organization, right, itself. And so 15 years ago, there was a significant shift in what enterprise applications actually were, right? So prior to say 2010, maybe 2012, something like that, almost all enterprise applications were something that were installed locally at a data center inside of an organization, right? Whether there was no such thing as cloud, there was no such thing as SaaS applications, none of that kind of thing. And the enterprise IT owned, the tools that users would use. SaaS and companies like Salesforce specifically came into this model and figured out a way to essentially create shadow IT across organizations, right? Where you no longer needed infrastructure to run a tool. All you really needed was a web browser, and now you could sell directly to a VP of this or director of that or whatever. And now enterprise IT organizations had to manage not only their own infrastructure, not only their own application development, not only their own servers, but they had to come up with models that would allow individual business units, divisions, whatever you want to call them, to start to use some of the SaaS applications. And so they started to come up with mechanisms, checklists, so on, to be able to manage what data would get into these types of tools. In today's environment, we're probably still using very similar methodologies and tools to try to manage what enterprise IT organizations would call this shadow IT tools, right? But they're no longer that, right? When you uploaded your data to a CRM or you uploaded your data to a payroll tool, excuse me, or you uploaded your data to some type of business intelligence tool, the tool itself was not aware of what you were doing, right? They were essentially just a pretty interface to a database that potentially had some type of process development on top of it, like a flow engine or whatever, that allowed people to kind of make quote unquote smart decisions inside of the SaaS applications. The problem today is that AI is fully aware of everything that you're doing, right? They're not only taking in the data elements that you're giving to it, they're actually trying to make decisions for you. So they're not asking you, they're not providing you a platform that says, hey, if A happens, then B should happen, then C should happen, then D should happen. The AI itself is trying to understand what the D endpoint is and how it can generate code or whatever, or a process that gets you to D as quickly as possible. The other part of it is that the data that you're uploading into the tool is actually being used to train the tool itself, right? So it's actually, the data that all of these organizations are uploading into like a Claude or a ChatGPT or whatever other AI tool there is, that data is actually, being used to future train that model. So if you're a small organization and you've built a very unique application, and now you've uploaded your source code or your source data or your customer data into a SaaS application, into an AI application, thinking that AI application is going to speed up your development efforts or help you process things. Well, now that AI is actually learning what you do and could easily just do the exact same thing. So that's one of the problems. The other problem from a governance perspective is that it's not just about the usage of the tool and what the tool is, what a person decides to do with a specific AI tool. It's that the tools themselves, the AI tools, are not thinking the same way a traditional application would think, right? What I mean by this is that, say I upload, a CSV file containing, 10 million lines, rows of data with, 50, 60 columns, whatever it is. And I ask the AI tool, hey, can you generate a report based on this data? In our minds, what the AI is going to do is just going to look at the data elements and try to generate the type of report that we're asking it to do. So I work a lot in geo data, and I'm asking it, hey, show me all of the homes that also have a red roof. And I'm thinking that it's just going to create some type of SQL code that's going to look at the red roof. But in AI world, it doesn't look at that way. What it looks at is how can I generate an application that will do the specific thing that the person is asking? And that's great. But what happens when it's in an enterprise environment and it goes in there and it says to itself, hey, this person gave me this data set and they gave me these parameters, but I'm seeing errors here. What if I generate code that will find the data on my own within their system that they didn't give me access to? And that's what AI does. It will actually go and hack your internal systems to get the data that it needs to try to create the thing that it thinks you want, right? And so if we don't have governance in place that allows us to manage that allows us to understand how and why AI is making the decisions that it's making and interject ourselves into where it's making those decisions, it could essentially do anything it wants on your corporate network. So in a lot of ways, everyone is afraid of saying, oh, I'm going to use Claude.com and or ChatGPT whatever, and I'm going to upload my data set into that user interface in the browser. And they think, hey, that's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that I'm putting my data up in that system. Where the reality is that the more dangerous scenario is that you're running this stuff on your own infrastructure. You're running this stuff on your own laptops. You're running this stuff on your own data centers. And now the AI, because it doesn't want to ask you another question to see what it should be doing, it wants to prove itself as an expert in the particular field. It goes in and just starts to generate the code, hack the systems, wreak havoc on whatever it wants. And you're just thinking that it's going to find you the homes with the red roof.
That is fascinating to me, and which is why we're having a conversation, because I don't think people actually realize the how complex and how difficult the situation could be when you employ an AI tool. And you mentioned about in the past, IT teams employ shadow IT, and the so-called shadow IT is supposed to kind of mimic and help the different organizations. But now it is shadow AI. And those two are very different in my opinion, because shadow AI will actually go in and, as you mentioned, and to do things that you may not know, because it feel that you want it to do this certain task because you've gave it an objective, and it's not going to ask you other questions and find its own way to make those decisions, right? So this is the so-called black box. Is that the right assumption?
So that's part of it, right? Part of it is that it's the way that AI has been trained, the way that AI has been forced into the environments is that it's actually trying to get as little input from a user as possible to do its job. And what we find, and I'm sure people, anyone who plays with AI is going to find AI is extraordinarily confident in its own abilities. And it's confident in telling you things that are potentially completely incorrect, partially incorrect, or just pure fiction, and what it's, because it's been trained to do that. AI is not intelligence in the systematic way that we think of intelligence today, right? AI is intelligence in that it is designed, especially specifically LLMs, right? Specifically LLMs are designed to make guesses, and so each thing that it does next is a better guess of the thing that came before it. And so as it deploys into your environments, if there are no guardrails and if there are no safety nets that are put in there, or if you're not using skills, or if you're not defining your agents in the right way, it will try to do whatever it can. And even with skills and even with agents, I'm constantly finding, like, I'm I probably spend between 6 and 8 hours a day working with AI on different projects. At the moment, I'm building an application that will log all of my different usages. So I'll use Claude and Claude CLI and Claude desktop, and then I'll use Codex and ChatGPT and all these and Gemini CLI, and I use all of them. And so I'm building a tool that allows me to see how I'm going from one to another and how much tokenization it's using and all of that kind of stuff. But as I'm building this tool, I'm using all the tools to build it. And what I'm finding is that no matter which tool it is, no matter how many skills I have in place, no matter how many constructs I have to define the agents, it still doesn't do the same thing every single day. And so I find that I have to start a new session constantly because the context of the session is too large. When the context of the session gets too large, it decides which skills or which constructs it wants to ignore and just ignores them. And then when I ask it, hey, did you ignore this? It says, you're right. Thank you for pushing back on me. I'll go back and do it again. And so what we're finding is that even with us trying to put in guardrails, even with us trying to put in a confinement to AI, it still pushes past those boundaries. And so, that's really where the big trick is.
The way I see it, the problem is just going to compound itself as AI develops so quickly and companies are potentially employing more and more AI systems to be in their organizations, right? So I read this very interesting stat, and it's very worrisome, that 82% of enterprises have unknown shadow AI agents running within their organization, in their infrastructure. Now, within the space that you're in the US and advising all the different companies, are you seeing the same phenomenon?
Yeah, so there's a couple of problems that have happened along the way, right? I think that we're still at very much an infancy stage of AI, right? In the sense of AI that most people think of it today, right? I've been working in AI for significantly longer than most people have been working in AI, but the work that I was doing was all machine learning based. Detection stuff or mathematical trading platforms, that type of stuff, and or high frequency trading, all of those kinds of things. So we've had AI in the enterprise for quite a significant amount of time, but that type of AI has been working in very, very controlled environments. And most AI and most enterprises have been able to manage that type of thing relatively easily without a significant amount of security risk. Although all AI has leaned heavily on the open source environment, and open source itself has significant security risks that we can talk about if you'd like. But for the most part, they've been able to control that. This new AI, this thing that we're thinking of, the ChatGPTs and the Claudes of the world and the Gorks and Geminis and all that kind of stuff, this is a relatively new thing. Most organizations have been pushing their employees to adapt or to understand how AI could potentially benefit their organizations. We've all heard things, and recently we've heard the opposite of those things, where organizations will say, we have an AI leaderboard, and which of our developers or which of our users are using the most AI, and they're celebrating that thing. We're starting to see that scale back significantly as the cost of AI tokens have skyrocketed. But at the same time, many people are still significantly worried about their jobs. They're worried about competition from, other people who might be using AI, that type of thing. So they're using it. But at the same time as leadership may be pushing, the theory or the concept that every company is a technology company and that every company is an AI company now, at the same time that they're doing that, you have governance organizations within these enterprises that are saying, hey, slow down. We don't know where our data is sitting. We don't have a real governance around it. We don't know how this will affect long-term scalability of our platforms. We don't know how it will affect technical debt, even though some folks will say that technical debt no longer matters because if you have AI that can write code overnight, who cares about the technical debt? You'll just release a new version of it tomorrow because AI can write it for you. There's those types of conversations are happening as well. So what happens when you have this constraint of the big boss is saying use AI, but your internal IT organization is saying we need to slow down, we need to be more methodical about this, we need to know where our data is, we need to know what the governance is. What happens when the AI companies themselves make it super easy for you to just download the tool on your desktop or on your phone, or forget about downloading it at all and just using the web interface? Remember, the ChatGPT of 2024 was simplistic. The ChatGPT of today has projects, it has coding capabilities, it has all kinds of things directly in the website itself. So your junior level staff and potentially your mid-career people can just start to take the processes that they've already been working on for the last 5, 6, 10 years and put them into a shadow IT website and do their work for them. And as they, as the environment, the jobs environment, the economic environment, and all those things put pressure on them, and they start to worry that, hey, even the guys at Meta, even the guys at Microsoft are losing their jobs to AI. What's going to happen to me if I'm not the one who's actually implementing these tools and showing tremendous value from the onset? And so, like all things, it's going to follow the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance is typing a URL into a website and just using that tool to be able to create a presentation in a few hours, or to be able to create a piece of Python code that's going to, or a piece of SQL code that's going to like analyze a large data set, and thinking that that's really not going to affect anyone but yourself. Because, hey, I don't need to upload 10 million lines of a CSV file. I could just upload a header with 3 or 4 rows and tell the AI to build me the SQL code to do that. And so that's an easy way thinking that I'm not really putting my company's information into the cloud. I'm not really putting my company's information into an AI agent. I'm just kind of taking a quick approach to writing some SQL code. And that's what we see over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, it just shows the severity of the issue, because my first 2 guests, we were talking about the same situation along these lines. One of them is a top lawyer, in Hong Kong. It just shows the severity of it. Now, again,
the question I would have, for one of your first guests, and this is to the lawyer, because I don't actually know the answer to this question. So if you want to follow up with them, the other problem within all of this is the ownership, right? It's not clear to anyone at this point who actually owns the output that the AI is creating, right? So if I publish an article and I have AI create an image, a banner image for that article, do I own that banner image, or does ChatGPT own that banner image? If I create a process and that generates a bunch of SQL code, do I own the SQL code, or is this code owned by the AI? And what's really interesting about that is that if you're doing coding at the moment with AI agents, and if you're I use a protocol called OpenSpec, which allows me to spec out applications and then do iterations on it before it actually anything gets coded. Well, when Claude specifically does a Git pull request or a commit, it actually says Claude in it, right? So it says, Claude powered by Mario, or Claude enhanced. So if Claude, and so when that software gets released into the world, like I'm working on some open source projects, when that software gets released as an open source project and has Claude all over the source, not only the design of the source code, because you can tell that something is AI generated, but it's actually committing code as Claude, well, then who owns that code? Right. And so those answers haven't been, we haven't had litigation that's answered that. We haven't had, precedent that's been set. What we have had precedent that was set is that, the AI tools have imported books on everything so that they could do training. And now they've had to pay some royalties to those books. But when I looked at the royalty numbers, they're relatively small compared to the economic benefit that they've provided to the actual AI organization. And so these are questions that organizations have to ask from a governance perspective. how much is my IP actually worth? And if I'm generating new IP with AI, is that AI partially an owner of that IP? You know, is it one thing when one thing when I'm paying the token costs and I'm using AI to generate code? Is it a different thing if I'm just paying the $20 a month and generating code? I don't think that those types of things have been answered yet, and those are the types of conversations that I'm having with enterprises, saying, you know, what stance are we going to take when our folks are actually building?
Interestingly enough, the lawyer I spoke to is an IP lawyer. So,
You should definitely ask him. I have those questions.
I think I will, because we did touch on a big part on the liability. But you're right, you know, because the images that I generate has a Gemini logo at the side. Now, of course, I can take out those watermark, but it doesn't change the fact that AI manufactured that together with me as well, and who owns the benefits of that. But we do know who owns the liability, even though there's not been a lot of precedence about this issue. Maybe it's starting to come out now that there are issues and problems happening out of AI that, realistically speaking, and there are laws governing around that as well, especially you know, in this space in Hong Kong and Singapore, which I'm more well versed about, that the onus lies with the user, because the AI is a tool, you know. But you definitely make a very
similar,
good point.
You know, similar in the United States, the liability will lie with, you know, the person that's deploying the actual code or image or process or whatever it is. But you know, liability is one thing. But you know, when you're getting to the liability portion of the conversation, that means you've done something wrong. What happens from the economic gain perspective? Like, you know, if I want to build $100 million business, I want to own, you know, a significant share of that revenue, of that profit. And do I own that is the question, right? And sure, at the end of that, there could be liability, there could be accidents, anything could happen at the end, and obviously those things do need to be solved. But you know, is it do we even get that far is really the question.
There's a whole chain of discussions here, right? Because there are also issues now that the AI companies themselves don't own the intellectual property of the things that they took in, which is why the issues on the artists and authors now suing the AI companies, because essentially it's the AI tools taking into, you know, all the different information in the web. You know, so okay, we've established enough of the problem, and I want to leave enough time, you know, to get to the solution, or rather, what you think organizations can do, because I know that you spend a lot of time in this space in terms of governance and advising organizations as well. So we spend a whole lot of time talking about problems. So if I'm an organization and we are having this conversation, what would be the first thing that you, Mario Camaj, will tell me? Like, what should I do? Where do I start? Assuming that I'm also in the adoption cycle. I'm a CEO. I've asked my IT director to employ AI, but again, there are studies that say that 92% of IT leaders, they admit that they do not fully understand the stack of the automated systems that are running in their company. So even if they don't know, where do we start? What would you do?
So, you know, partially I was alluding to an open source project that I've been working on that I'm hoping to release in the next couple of weeks, and it really around the usage, right? So if you're a Claude user, or you're a Gemini user, or you're a DeepSeek user, those tools themselves do a relatively good job of showing the usage, right, and showing the value. A lot of these companies are essentially trying to sell in a very similar way that a cloud provider like an AWS or Microsoft Azure or Alibaba Cloud was trying to sell their services. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to go to larger organizations and they're saying, hey, we'd like you to commit to $1 million, $3 million, $10 million worth of spend over the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years, that type of thing. And that's how they package their enterprise sales divisions, because it's much easier to sell to a CIO of an organization, a large bundle of capabilities, and then have once you've signed those letters of intents and you've signed the contracts, then it becomes an entire organization around trying to get the users at those organizations to actually use up those credits, right? So if I sell you, $2 million worth of Azure, then I have to be the one then I have another organization inside of my organization that's going to work with, like I'll sell directly to a CIO, and then I'll work with the director of infrastructure, the director of applications, the director of this, the director of that, to sell them the various services that are available on the Azure platform, right? And, rescale their software, reconfigure it to be cloud, cloud native, cloud first, whatever you want to call it. So the AI guys, for all the innovation that they've done in this space, as far as, the automation and intelligence, they're still falling back on that type of model. Sure, they have the $20 subscriptions and the $200 subscriptions and the add tokens to your credit card type thing. But the reality is that the vast majority of what they're selling to enterprises will be sold as, a bundle of credits that those organizations need to use. And what they sell together with that is the capability to understand the usage across your own organization on that specific tool, model, whatever, right? But like you were saying, what's happening is that the AI world is moving so fast that, today we have, Claude 4.8, and 2 weeks ago, ChatGPT 5.5. Before that, it was, Opus 4.6. So every couple of weeks, a new model comes out, and the hype around those models is so great that the people who are actually using them move from one to the other, to the other, to the other, because the capabilities are exponentially better to move than to try to stick in the environment that you already have. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. One is the CIO of the organization just spent $3-4 million on one model, and people are not using it. The second problem is that as they go from one to another, the organization has no good way, no easy way to understand how people are switching. The other massive problem is that they don't know how effective the switching actually is, right? So if I just bought, $2 million of Gemini, and my coders went from Gemini to Codex and ChatGPT, and then they go to 4.8 on Claude, is there an actual effectiveness to switching models that's worth the additional overhead of security and governance and stuff and monitoring that I need to put in place that outweighs the benefit of just switching the model that quickly. Also, are there patterns and I'm going to go, like the guys that I'm working with primarily are around the development, the developers themselves. So I work with enterprise architects, I work with enterprise development folks, I work with, independent development shops, that type of thing. I work somewhat with, process people who are taking business ownership of a specific process within their business and seeing how they act. But that's a lot less of an issue than the real kind of core development of the organization, because a business process can be changed relatively quickly. A core infrastructure play, a core piece of engineering that goes out to customers as well, that's a much more difficult play, and it has significantly more liability associated to it as well. So so the first thing that when I'm talking to CIOs or I'm talking to VPs of information technology at organizations is, what are the tools or what are the processes that you're using to manage understanding not only what tools your folks are using, but how effective those tools are at the end game of what they're trying to create. So if they've started developing a 6-month project, a coding project, and they're in the first 2 months they were using one tool, and in the next 3 months they were using another tool, and now they're at the tail end of it and they're using yet another tool. Was there an actual benefit Did the development time speed up? Did the code quality improve? Were you able to ship things faster? Did the tool enable your agile processes to work, faster, better, smarter, cheaper, that type of thing? Because if you don't have a baseline of what that is, then there is no point in having a conversation about anything else, right? Who cares about the governance of something if that tool doesn't actually have an ROI that's positive compared to what the traditional way of doing that? So number one is understanding what your people are using. Number two is understanding how effective what they're using actually is. And then number three is how much of what you're using is being used on internal systems. Like, did you sign up for a Google Cloud account and you're using Claude on the Google account, but you're a long-term Google customer and you have all your other infrastructure on Google, so you have a data governance in place for all of your tools, right? Because you can run models like that in your version of a Google Cloud instance without anyone having additional touch points into that. So that's number one. Number two is, I'm sorry, that's number two. Number two is really understanding like where your stuff is actually sitting. Is it is it local? Is it in a Google? Is it in a cloud environment that you control, or is it in a shared cloud environment that you don't really have control over, but you have SLAs for? Or is it just like a website that you're pointing to wherever the hell Claude decides to be that day, right? And that matters not only from a governance perspective for your own personal data, but also, is it GDPR scalable, right? Is data moving across borders that would be otherwise an issue for other outside governing bodies, that type of thing? We don't know any of that yet. So number one is, what are your people using? How effective is it? Number two is, where are the things that they're using actually sitting? And what are the SLAs or governance in place around that? And then the third goes back to the original conversation that we're having, is how core to your specific business is this? Do you own the IP of this? If you own the IP of this, is using a model, is using an outside third-party tool, regardless of what that tool is, going to affect the ownership that you have of that? Then the last thing is it an internal tool or is it an external tool? How much liability do you have if you put this out into the world as an external tool, as opposed to just being an internal tool where if something happens and you have to turn it off, sure, it affects your business, but it doesn't affect your reputation outside of your business. Whereas if it's an external tool, if you're designing, developing, managing, hosting, whatever, an external tool that has 2 million, 5 million, 100 million, or in this world today, 1 billion users, will a security flaw within the development of it through an AI protocol actually affect your business? And so you have to go from in that order, understanding those things, and then building the bespoke governance models that you need for all of those along the way.
It sounds like a complex web of issues. So even the first part
listen,
itself,
it keeps people like me employed, right? So
I think people like you is very, very needed, especially in this space, because I hear this phrase from the lawyer: they don't know what they don't know, right? Because MIT Technology Review said that only 9% of C-suite, especially the non-technical C-suites, possess an understanding of these systems. And you uncovered, as I was counting, like 5 major areas, and even each of these areas is a significant amount of work in terms of, making sure that we are doing the right thing, especially the speed of the AI progression is compounding and so quick. As you are untangling, the more complexity comes in. It's really a cocktail for a lot of issues, By end of the day, one of the key things you mentioned just now is everything that they are doing generating the outcome that they desire. And most of the conversations I hear now is a lot of experimentation, many of it born out of either fear of missing out, FOMO, or pressures, within the board if there is a bigger organization to employ AI, or rather cost savings, improve bottom line using AI. But most have not seen benefits of what AI can actually do for their organizations, apart from maybe just the mundane generation of content. Is that what you're seeing, and what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. There is a significant amount of capability improvement that I've seen from an AI perspective. I don't know a coder today who's not using AI to generate some percentage of their code. You hear stories of people using it for 80, 90, 100% of their code. You hear stories of people using it for 10, 20% of their code. But to me, for the developers that I've been working with, it seems that they're using it probably to generate about, somewhere about 50% of what they do. A lot of it is on the testing side, being able to finish a project and throw it towards 5 different AIs and have it do the test generation scripts for you and automate the CI/CD process for you. That type of thing seems to be a massive benefit to a lot of developers, and I think that it's sped a lot of development up for a lot of folks. There are also a whole bunch of people who have created a whole bunch of new mini applications. There's these stories of people who are publishing an app a week, that type of thing, right? And they're putting it on like a marketplace, and if it generates, $50, $60, $100,000, it's a win, because if they generate 52 of those a year and 5 to 10 of them hit, and they're generating $50,000, $60,000 on it, all of a sudden you have a solo entrepreneur who has a pretty good business going, right? So there's definitely that, and that's definitely happening. What I also see happening significantly is that there's been a lot of hype around AI, significant amount of hype. There's this entire conversation of we had this incredible new chatting function 2 years ago to today, everyone talking about Skynet and I'll be back and the world being taken over by AI. And what we're finding is that it still generates a lot of errors. It still needs a significant amount of handhold. Now, I'm not saying that that's not going to get improved. What I'm saying is that it's probably not going to get improved at the speed that the hype cycle makes it sound, right? So could it be another 3 years? Could it be another 5 years? Could it be another 10 years until we get to this kind of AGI environment? Probably more realistic that it'll be somewhere between 3 to 5 years for a couple of different reasons. But one of them being that the lower end of the market, this capability to run these small models on commodity hardware. If you got a MacBook that has 48 gigs of RAM and you have an Llama installed on your machine, you can run a Kimi, or run a Gemma, or even some of the meta models, and get some significant tooling in place to speed up your development cycle. I mean, my 13-year-old son built a model hand operated through a camera, and he used Kimi on with VS Code and the local LLM on his MacBook to build a processor in C that would look at the fingers and then move the fingers on an Arduino on a 3D printed hand that he had built, right? And he's a 13-year-old kid that didn't really understand coding, but he understood enough about engineering and enough about what the tools that he needed to build that. And now all of a sudden, he did that in 2 weeks, that type of thing. And so you start to put that against people who actually have know-how, and they are using the tools to great effect to speed up their own personal development, their own IT development within their organization, that type of thing. But again, there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of errors. There's a lot of security concerns. And those things take time. On the flip side of all of that capability is also the cost that's now being attributed to these models. And so, NVIDIA's CEO said, you should be looking at, earmarking $400,000 to $500,000 a year in tokens for your top developers, that type of thing. And that's still the case, right? So what this promise of taking a 100-person developer team and converting it to a 10-person developer team because now they have AI doesn't seem to be panning out, right? So what's really happening is that 100-person development team got shrunk to like a 75-person development team or a 65-person development team, and they are able to prototype significantly faster, and they're able to potentially get a product out somewhat faster, but it's happening at a significant cost from a compute perspective, from an AI perspective, and it's happening at a significant cost from an error rate perspective.
Mario, every time I hear you, I feel that there's just so much to unpack. So if the video gets a high view, I may need to bring you back again. We'll see.
I'm happy to unpack more.
It is in just a few minutes that you mentioned. There's so many things I wrote down. Especially a couple of things like your 13-year-old son building that. I'm super interested about that. Perhaps we'll come back to that a little bit more. You mentioned about the developer being able to iterate or generate apps at an alarming or rather lightning pace at the moment, which is why I think, again, I saw just a couple of days ago that the app upload to the space is 300 or 400% more in just recent times, right? So I think that's going to change, right? So App Store, or rather, all the different providers are not going to be allowing the slop, all the different apps, because right now generating an app is not a deal anymore. You can generate just by a click of a button, and within a couple of minutes you have an app and you can reiterate them. So that's going to be an issue there, which we'll get to later. But when I was asking you that question, I think the point I was trying to get to, and most organizations are more concerned about, is the real bottom line efficiency and improvement. For lack of a better analogy, dollars, money that they can actually see out of employing AI. And that's what a CEO is going to be concerned about. Yes, the team is going to be more productive and they're going to be doing more with less. But right now we are only seeing more companies lay off people. And of course, you make more money by saving more money. That's probably step one right now. Freezing hiring, and it's something that, even in the past 1 year, I've already seen it and said it that way, and it's all playing out at the moment, where first step is more about freezing hiring, right? We know that we freeze hiring, and that's why the youth and the younger people are getting less opportunities at the moment. And then step two is firing, which is where we are seeing, the bigger companies are firing 10-15% of their workforce to save that money. They actually haven't really seen an improvement in really what AI is making more money for them. What do you see to that?
There is a significant amount of what you're talking about, layoffs at organizations. There's a significant amount of people who are, kind of stopping hiring or postponing it. And it's created an extremely difficult market, especially for young folks that are coming into the market. And that's, it's sad, it's unfair. And I think that a lot of it is a lot more to do with geopolitical issues than it has to do with actual economic issues. One thing, though, that is really relevant in this space is that up until now, AI has been significantly financed by other people, right? So there's a subsidy that's been happening in the marketplace for the utilization of AI, right? Like we were talking earlier. You can get a $20 subscription, you can get a $100 subscription, you get a $200 subscription, and with a $200 subscription, you can do almost anything all day long with very little limits, right? And that is a subsidy that's happening so that you get more people onto these platforms relatively quickly. When you start switching over to actual usage-based economics, right? So the tokenization economics, that's when you start getting into the $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 accounts. that these developers are using, and potentially that your process-oriented people are going to be using. Definitely when you start to build the APIs into your software, right? So when you start to have the chat bots, when you start to have the recognition software, when you start to have all of those things in place, the cost of AI is going to be significantly higher, and we're going to see that happen relatively quickly because the Anthropics of the world are starting to go to IPO, right? When they become a publicly traded company, then all of a sudden quarterly earnings are going to matter significantly, right? And the only way that they're going to be able to drive quarterly earnings at some point is not going to be through those $20 subscriptions. It's going to be through those enterprise tokenization accounts, because that's the actual real ROI for them, right? The $20 individual accounts are a way to show reach and like the traditional Facebooks of the world. They get to 1 million users, to 10 million users, to 100 million users, to 1 billion users, to 3 billion users. That's because they're not selling ads. That's the only way for them to do that, and they've done a really great job of doing that. But that does not subsidize the amount of AI that actually gets the processing power needed to manage that amount of people, right? Facebook didn't have that. I mean, obviously they had to build data centers and they had to build their own infrastructure and all that kind of stuff, and so there is significant cost. But they had advertising to offset those costs. In this space, advertising probably is not going to be acceptable, even though they are. Some of these AI companies are starting to experiment with some of that, and that might potentially be okay for the search engines of the world and for the light usage of the world. But for developers or for processes or for businesses that are tying AI directly into the applications that they build, that's not going to be a way to subsidize those costs. And so you're seeing it. You're seeing organizations now starting to talk about how much that tokenization actually is costing them, and they're starting to look at, can they minimize those costs, or was it cheaper, faster, better to just have people working on that rather than to have AI work on that? Now, that's a much longer discussion. Like you said, there is a significant push for this commodity, small LLMs running on local machines, potentially running on stacks of Mac Minis in the data center and that type of thing, and potentially the secret behind a company like Apple's success is that they've never really hit it. They missed SaaS, they missed cloud, they missed Facebook, but they figured out infrastructure and how to sell songs, and they figured out infrastructure and how to run local models, and they figured out all this other stuff that the hype cycle really hasn't caught on to yet, but will as these costs start to come up. And I think that and in the work that I'm doing with CEOs and CIOs and VPs of IT, is I'm pushing them to really start to think about what local models look like within their organizations and how much efficiency they're getting from those local models, because running a local model is still significantly cost effective to running non-local models for simplified tasks. So anything that we can automate with a local model, it allows us to reduce costs significantly, and it allows us to control the entire process and the entire governance around. And so anywhere where I can push that, I do push that.
That's great.
Excuse me.
So we potentially will see a rehiring once organizations realize the cost of tokens are quite high as well. We could see a amount of people getting rehired back into the organization. And
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that, and that's definitely not what I was saying. I believe that high tides rises all boats, right? And I truly believe, if we look at the last 5,000 years, every time we've had a technological innovation, it's created more work and more jobs and more people and all the rest of that. And I think that will that will occur in this space. I think that kids like my son, who are becoming native AI users, right, that at 13 and 14, are going to be entering the workforce in 10 years from now. and they're going to look at the world in a much different way. They're never going to think to themselves, oh, I need to learn C++ or I need to learn Python, because the AI tool is going to do that for them. What they're going to need to learn is how the world interacts with each other, how the AI agents interact with each other, and how they can be the intelligent orchestrator that manages that process with them. And I think that you'll see a lot of opportunity for a lot of people to grow in that. Cars got rid of the horse and buggy, but they generated infrastructure, highways, gas stations, mechanic shops, all kinds of things. So you no longer need the guy who knows how to train a horse, and you no longer need the guy who rides the buggy, but you need a race car driver, you need a mechanic, you need a construction worker. And I think AI will ultimately do the same thing. Unfortunately, whenever you have a significant technology innovation like that, whether it's the car or the cotton mill or the Bronze Age, the people who don't adapt do get left behind. And so from a social perspective, from a humanistic perspective, how we manage that transition is going to be a definition of what type of people we are.
Perhaps I need to get your son as one of my guests on the show as well.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd love to do it. He could show his hand.
I mean, it's we love to see that, though, how he did it. And I know you call that a discerning user, and I wanted to unpack that a little bit. Let's talk about the user. You put it in 3 buckets of being a refuser, an uncritical adopter, or a discerning user. So as we transition from the organization to people working in the organization, and someone like your son, what would you like to tell us a little bit more about how you see someone taking back that, what I call a digital sovereignty or digital literacy in this new age?
Sure. So I generally try to take an optimistic view of the world in general, and so I do believe that things will get better, and ultimately they'll, we go through cycles of everything, right? And there'll be significant growth that will lift all boats, type of thing. But I do have some pessimism as well. I think that there are folks who believe that they're safe from AI, that their job is either so critical or so devoid of being able to be automated, that they don't see it coming after them. And so those people, I think, really truly need to evaluate how they're going to survive in a world where automation is everything, right? And it's coming after everything. It's coming after the lawnmower cutting grass in your yard. It's coming after the taxi driver. It's coming after people like me who are developers or work in developer environments. So that group of people that are almost deniers, I worry about significantly. Then the second group of people are the group that says, this is coming. We need to do something about it. We need to hire the right people to do it. We need to look outside of our own organization and find the talent, or find the companies that are doing this that can do it for us, and all that kind of stuff. So there's definitely that group of people as well. Like, I know AI is coming. I don't know anything about it. I'm just going to trust what I see in YouTube or companies that are publishing things, and I'll just I'll beat it that way. And then there's the third group who are the discerners, right? The people who are really understanding the fundamentals of these tools, understanding the fundamentals of what's behind the tools. Like, for instance, at the beginning of the conversation, I said, we talk about AI in the last 2 years from this entire large language model, but AI has been around since the 1960s, right? And I've been working in AI for the last 10 years from a machine learning perspective, and utilizing, computer vision and neural networks and that type of thing to build applications or build capabilities. So the people who are starting to dig a little deeper into what the actual tool is doing and how it's doing it and how it's making the decisions that it makes. Now, they don't need to be computer scientists. They don't need to dig into the enterprise architecture pieces of it itself or the decision-making capabilities of it itself. But what they do need to understand is what an actual model components look like. Why, what's the difference between a 2 billion parameter model and a 144 billion parameter model, and how that will affect the business needs that they have, how that will affect the products that they choose to build or deploy or utilize. Those are the people who really are going to become kind of like the gatekeepers of technology innovation going forward within their own organizations, within their customer groups, and even from a larger sense, from a thought leadership perspective. They're going to be the ones who are setting the trends and setting where we go next.
We all say learn AI, but many people don't know where to start. Of course, it says that, okay, just try something. But even I see all these different workshops, about, learning OpenClaw, all that kind of thing. But the speed of how AI is progressing really means that even if you have mastered OpenClaw a month ago, the tool is going to get so automated that it's seamless and you don't really need to know to dive so deep into the AI tool. So your advice to someone who is a uncritical adopter or refuser, where do you start?
I mean, quite frankly, the people who are refusers, they're getting left behind, and we're not pushing on them at all. There's so much to do, and there's so much forward momentum that if you're not engaging with us, then we're not going to engage with you either. It just, I don't have the bandwidth, right, to do that. And I wish I did, but I just don't. On the critical side of things, that I think is an opportunity for a significant amount of people. And again, I never focus on things like OpenClaw or any specific tool, because what's happening with tools like OpenClaw is that the underlying engine that's running them, and they'll tell you stuff like, oh, we're agnostic to the LLM model, or we can work on anything, blah blah blah. The problem is that the benefits of tools like that start to get integrated directly into the LLM itself. And so it's not just that another better tool gets created, it's that the LLM itself is just going to start to do that thing. And there was an article that I read recently where they talked about Apple and how they did that kind of stuff, and how, let's say Apple Music came out and then it killed, anyone else who was delivering music. But Spotify still survived, right? Because there is still, that need for a better experience. The tools, and I think this is where people get tripped up a lot, and probably in what you're seeing from like a training perspective, is that everyone says, oh, just use a tool for a little bit and start playing around and you're going to see the kind of benefit of it. The problem is that, like, if you're just chatting with the tool, you could do very simplistic things and make it work. But if you're trying to integrate the tool with like an MCP, like, into your email process, or you're trying to integrate it into your CRM, or you're trying to integrate it into some process that you're running in the background, those types of things still require a significant amount of technical know-how. I run both, an enterprise version of Outlook, and I run, Gmail accounts, and I still have some other, third-party, Zoho tools and stuff like that. Getting Gemini to work with Gmail was super easy. Getting Claude to work with a new version of Outlook is extremely difficult. I've actually had to go and write a brand new MCP for myself to be able to do that. But I'm only capable of doing that because I've already built email applications in the past, and I understand the kind of nuances of what that takes. And so just telling someone who's a non-expert, or someone who's a novice or a denier, or whatever you want to call them, to go and play with Claude, and it'll do the things for them. They're not going to get the benefit that would they're not going to see the results that would give them the benefit that would make them want to use that on a daily basis, or make them want to change their processes to that, because the tool already has a lot of errors, and if you have no expertise, it's just going to make decisions and choices and errors for you that will compound without you ever even understanding what those errors are. So when we're trying to do this, teaching and learning perspective, what we're actually trying to do with folks is to do hands-on sessions with them and say, hey, what if you share your screen with me? Or what if we sit, desk to desk, and you show me how you're using it? And then we try to actually walk them through and see what errors they make, and give them kind of training as to how to not make those same errors in the past, or how to put in guardrails around that. So there is still a significant amount of human interaction that needs to happen to help get these people along. One of the key things is actually to train the trainers, and that is to go into these organizations and say, hey, you have these mandates from your boards to use more AI. What are the programs that you're putting in place? What are the training opportunities that you're putting in place to help people do that? Now, there's two effective things that happen when you do something like that. One is you get the deniers and the wall sitters to start to use the tools. The other thing is, as you're training them, you can train them on governance, right? You can show them how to do things in a way that's significantly better for your organization over time. And so it's actually a huge opportunity for organizations to train the people that work for them the way that they should be trained on these tools, rather than them just going on YouTube and coming back to the organization and say, hey, I saw, John Doe do it this way, kind of thing. And John Doe has no experience in security, has no governance issues. All he's trying to do is sell an ad on YouTube.
That's where I see the gap is, and I'm really glad to hear it from you, because I see all these different workshops and people getting together to learn OpenClaw. My immediate reaction to that was, it's not going to work. That's not where the fight is. And I'm so glad to get that you're seeing it the same way as well. And I think closing the gap, in terms of what you mentioned, is a big critical area. But again, we won't have time to go into that today. But before we end, I just want to ask you, Mario, is there anything else that we should have covered that we haven't? Would you like the audience to know?
I mean, just going back to what you said from the open Claude perspective and all that stuff. There is when we talk about AI, there's kind of three fundamental things that I think of. Number one is the enterprise, and really, what is the ROI of deploying this in your enterprise and making it a cost-effective solution, while still keeping in mind that it's not just about reducing headcount or that type of thing. So really, it's how do we implement this, have governance around not only our data but our IP and also our costs, right? So that's on the enterprise perspective. I think that there is a significant amount of people who can benefit from tools like OpenClaw that are small business owners. Maybe you run a small daycare, or maybe you run a small cleaning service or whatever. Mm-hmm. And there are some significant opportunities to do some automation from managing your sales processes, or your internal costs, or whatever. And I think that tools like that can be beneficial for the small business owner perspective. But the last one is that, and I think that the one that we fail to use is AI as an educational tool, right? Using it in a way that helps you learn new skills. And I'm not talking about learning AI skills. I'm talking about exploring other interests that you have. Maybe it's art. Maybe it's history. Maybe it's the thing that my son did, which is building a robotic hand. There are significant opportunities. We have never had a tutor that sits in our browser that has as much knowledge as an AI tool will have. I mean, they essentially have the entire world's knowledge there, and I think that most people are looking for a way to quickly write an email, or like you said earlier, to generate some content, or maybe automate a piece of business that they're doing. But what they're not using it for is to drill down into a piece of knowledge that they can, like you can ask AI to build you a lesson plan, build you a class structure, and then start to follow that thing, right? So it's no longer just about like, going to a university or paying for a class to learn something. It's really like you have this stuff in front of you that, and someone like me who considers themselves to be a lifelong learner, it's an extraordinarily powerful platform for that type of thing. And I think that that's the one thing that I don't hear anyone talking about, whether or not it's in the communities that I'm in or in the YouTube channels that I watch or anything like that. So, if you're new to AI and you're looking for ways to learn from AI, treat it as your personal tutor and dive deep into it and start with simple stuff. Hey, maybe you want to learn how to make the best ramen in the world, or maybe you want to fix something on your car, or maybe you want to build a robotic hand. Use it to learn, because I think that there's a lot there that most people are leaving on the table.
That's great, and we're gonna leave it right there. So much knowledge to unpack, and Mario, thank you so much for being on the chair session, where we try to unpack information like this from discerned users, very knowledgeable practitioners like you. So hopefully more people, can hear what you're saying, and we start more of these kind of conversations of making more people discern. Thank you so much for being with us, Mario.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure, and I always have a great time talking to you and talking about these types of issues and what the future brings.
Guys, if you found the episode useful, please subscribe, and I'll find more speakers like that to talk about all the various issues surrounding AI.